So the interesting thing about the Idaho massacre is that it hit pretty close to home. It's right here in our backyard. And so it very much gripped our area as well as the nation. Stephanie, I'm going to start with you. Why did you decide? I mean, this is still technically an ongoing case. It's still very much in the news. Why did you decide to start working on this podcast now?
I think because at the time when these murders occurred back in November of last year, it was right before the holidays, the beautiful photographs of these lovely college students having their lives taken, like we were all sickened by it. Honestly, I don't know how to find a stronger word. And speaking for Courtney and I, we talk about true crime on many podcasts that we work on and many cases that we work on, most of which are open investigation. And while there was a lot of news coverage, it was kind of hard to decipher what was real, what was fake. And a couple of things that really stood out was just the massive overkill of this. Keep in mind for listeners, and certainly the ones that are living so closely to this area, college is a presumed place that's safe and that, you're allowed to let your hair down and not have to look over your shoulder that someone's going to take your life the way you would have to maybe in a big city where we're kind of told to be more vigilant. And I think the idea that such close friends and beautiful friends that really had big, happy lives were taken from them and their families in such a disgusting way. We just started digging in. I don't even think we had a goal. It wasn't that we wanted to jump in because we had to do a podcast. It was really becoming hard to understand what was true and what was not because it had gotten so much media attention. And I'm sure even in your area, that was probably a bit annoying that there was this, group that kind of descended on the town. It does shape things a little bit. So really the spirit of the podcast has been to comb through what's real and what's not.
So Courtney, what has it been like combing through some of this stuff? Because I feel like going through files pertaining to such a gruesome act would be very hard to continue to comb through.
So in this case, because it is, as you said, it is so ongoing, Bryan Kohberger's trial, he's the accused murderer. It hasn't started and there actually is no date. It just got pushed from potentially it was supposed to be next month. And all that to say that none of the files you're speaking about have been released to the media. So we have not seen those. But in terms of, we spoke not that long ago to a really renowned forensic expert named Joseph Scott Morgan. And what has been released in the news of just, the details of what did happen to these, 4 college students, to hear it broken down in medical and forensic terms, it is really hard it's impossible to kind of digest.
I mean, the walls in this house were literally bleeding because there was so much commingling of blood of these 4 beautiful humans, right? So again, to use the word overkill is such an understatement. And there needs to be justice for it. And by the way, the idea that Bryan Kohberger, the accused, is the guy who's just this ordinary guy that lives nearby, who's a Ph.D. student studying the acts of murder, is unfathomable. And he just doesn't seem like the typical, boogeyman that we see in the movies that's holding a pitchfork and wearing a mask and saying, kill, 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 kill. We want to feel like, oh, I get a sixth sense. That person seems real scary. They must be they're dangerous. He has sort of the opposite demeanor of that. And I think that's what also makes this so scary.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like Ted Bundy. I mean, he was attractive and charismatic and charming. And then you're like, oh, wow, you're psychotic. Cool.
Yeah. And cool. In a day like today, too, in these days when people are on dating apps, by the way, they should be. This is not a stain against dating apps and making new friends and meeting people in college. That is the goal and should continue to be so. But just the idea that you could swipe right and land on somebody like this, he's not somebody that you'd be like, oh, cool, chill. He might be a little odd or a little shy or a little nerdy. Okay. Little, soft spoken. Okay. But, the world should not be dangerous. And frankly, this is a very unique case. And I think we should also say that too. This is not happening, all the time, which is why we cover these cases. It's, literally somebody had quoted this as being a gentleman named Scott Bond, who's a famous criminologist, said that it's as likely that you will be killed by a vending machine as it is that you will be killed by a serial killer or a mass murderer. So just to offer some safety to listeners, right? But that said, when these big things happen, we need to organize it and we need to unpack it and we need to better understand it so we know how to protect ourselves in the future. And also, more importantly, to keep the victims alive in everybody's minds, because so quickly, tragedy hits and the victims' families are grieving and the victims become a footnote in a newspaper article. And then the world moves on because we have to, right? I think our hope is to kind of keep the victims alive and keep their voices alive, certainly on the eve of a trial to be.
So that leads me to this question. Courtney, can you explain to me, if we don't have an ending, I mean, like, this is right now, if we ended the podcast tomorrow, it would be a to be continued. Why start it now if we don't know what the outcome is going to be yet?
Great question.
It's a great question, and I think it's a couple of reasons why. First of all, as Stephanie said, because we were already so authentically entrenched in it from day one, and we were speaking to, just not with doing a podcast, but as many reporters as we've known from other cases, we kind of were digging in and realized that there was so much to unpack, and in this particular case, to pull some fact from fiction, because there were some horrible things going on in social media in terms of witch hunts of people who were completely cleared, but their lives for a while were ruined. So it was part, going through all of that. And also, we've done several open cases, including the Piketon Massacre, another podcast, which we spoke with you about, and did 5 seasons on. And when we started that, there was no answer. But through the early reporting, it's a feedback loop, because even, listeners would reach out, or family members of the victims would hear it and reach out. And that just helped us build a more cohesive understanding. And so I think there's benefit and merit to starting and just doing what it is. Like you said, it's not scripted. What's the ending? I don't, we don't know.
And the hope is to be actionable, right? Some of this is not, we're not just doing a retell, we're trying to be actionable, and sometimes new information gets found with fresh eyes or fresh ears in this case, right? So sometimes the listener will reach out to us and just say, hey, here's a different perspective on that. Would you look into it? And, I think we work with the best team in the business who do. And that has shaped a lot of decisions. And, you bring up the Piketon Massacre. And in that case, some of the stuff that came up in the podcast through listeners and that we reported about ended up being a big part of the trial. And that was interesting. So we're starting the case really along with listeners, right? So yes, there is no ending yet, but we will be there until there is.
So besides being, I mean, I hate to use the word entertainment because it sounds like this is an entertaining in a positive way type of a thing. But besides being an entertainment venue, a vehicle, a podcast, you guys are doing some criminology type stuff too. Did you ever set out to be investigative reporters on different things? I mean, was that at career day?
Indeed, it was not at career day. And I'll speak for myself. It happened over time. And yeah, it was definitely not something I would say Stephanie and I, were dreaming of in kindergarten. But I think when over time with, producing documentaries, and when you get the honor of, say, speaking to a victim's family member, and you realize, that they have the strength to share their stories, and that provides, it's just a thing that, again, I think I know feel so strongly it just should be honored and shared. And if those victims' family members, they can go on, then we can certainly do our part to share the story of their loved ones.
Yeah, I have a
Stephanie, what
very
about
different.
you?
Yeah, I had a very different background altogether. I come from an unscripted reality show background, The Bachelor and American Idol, and very
Different, very
different,
different.
different context. Yeah, and early stuff, and it's a real look into just human behavior, right, and the curiosity of what makes us all tick. And I think the crossover between those audiences is very similar. True crime allegedly has a very strong hold on female listeners and audiences, right? And even for our documentaries, a big piece of it is a female audience. And I think that's frankly the same audience that likes watching people fall in and out of love as well, right? We want to be able to organize things in our head. We want to feel safe with our hearts and our bodies and our homes and our families. I think the DNA of both of those, granted, I came to true crime later in my personal career for reasons I can't quite explain. Curiosity, I think, more than anything. And frankly, I just watch a lot of Dateline and, have no other background other than just pure curiosity, because we're not solving things. We're not lawyers. We're not cops. We don't claim to be. We're aggregating those police officers or legal experts and just, making sure that our answers are getting questions. Our questions are the same as the audience, right? So we're just kind of along for the ride, making sure that we're at least getting the right people to answer the important questions and siphon through some of it. It's not that we're the experts. We're just the expert of knowing what is probably on the minds of many because it's on the minds of us.
So it's voyeuristic safety that women, I think we do. We watch all of this stuff, and there's this big joke. If a woman, I can't watch horror films. Like, you're not going to find me ever watching any horror film, but I will sit down and I will binge watch a true crime thing because I want to know what's out there and what to look for. But also you just kind of sit there and go, have I ever had any of the thought processes that this psychotic person has? No. Okay, but I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I mean, because we all feel a little crazy sometimes. And, it's just really interesting that you said that the females are the ones that kind of gravitated to it the most. It's because our heads are constantly on a swivel in this world, trying to figure out if we're safe.
Isn't that the truth? And that is the question of all questions, right? Like you ask yourself, are you checking the boxes of crazy? And then it's also like, is my circle checking the box of crazy? Is the guy that works next to me or is the person sitting next to me on the bus checking the boxes of crazy, right? Because in a lot of the cases that we work on, it's not super obvious who the accused is. It's like an ordinary person who, would be lovely if you were at church with them having lunch with a friend, or you're on a dating app, or, you just casually meet in the cubicle next to you at your new job. We want to feel in our hearts that we would get a sixth sense or that we would know it. Oh, in the wild, I can spot it. And speaking for myself, if there were a scary movie, I would probably be the dum-dum that like, I'm going to go check the woods by myself. I'd be the first to go. But now that I work in true crime for as long as we do now, I might survive the knife fight because I feel like I know some of the tricks and I know what to look for a bit. And I think that's the spirit of what we're always trying to figure out. And also to be mindful that we're not accusing people, in the press. Bryan Kohberger claims his innocence and his family is standing by him and he hasn't had a trial yet. So if he didn't do it, despite mounting evidence that has been, shared with the press, if he didn't do it, then who did? And we can't lose sight of that also, that there's another side to this. And, in the Piketon Massacre, which is the case that I think we met last time on, it was such a shock that 8 people were murdered by a local family that they knew so well. And they went about their business the next day. Like they went to the funerals. It was unimaginable. Crazy, right? And it's a level of crazy that we don't see often is the good news. But because when we do, I think it warrants us all taking a listen and making sure that we know what to look for.
In the last moment here, just real quick, Courtney, what do you do to unwind from looking at murder documents all day?
I have such a boring answer. I like to swim and I enjoy bourbon. That is the truth. I wish it were smarter or more exciting. But yeah.
Hey,
That's
it works. It works. And Stephanie, how about you?
I was going to say, I wish I had a good answer for that too. I don't know that I have that mastered quite yet. I don't. I think that it sort of seeps into your subconscious and it's hard. And I still sleep with one eye open.
Yeah, for sure. Stephanie, Courtney, I really hope I get to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Maybe we do a podcast about kittens and how they get
Yes.
along with puppies. It'd be super fun. And then maybe we bring some puppies and kittens to the Zoom meeting and we can like love on them.
Okay, I have the
a
first
dream.
one, my dog Dodger. This is how I unwind with my best friend Dodger, who's 4 pounds, is sitting in my lap right now.
Sweetie. Well, you guys take care of yourself. Stay
Back at
safe
you.
out there. The Idaho Massacre is on your podcasts now. So make sure everybody check it out because Stephanie and Courtney do a phenomenal job of just narrating what's going on.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
It's my pleasure. Take care, you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.